you say? Sorry, you're cutting out. No, I heard, the last thing I heard was you already have yours, and then you cut out at that. Yeah, I didn't know. Yeah, I'm hooked on the candidate right now. That's me. Okay. So she is 55, 55.4. Yeah, 55.4.55.
The best advances, I find, whether it's environmental protection or civil rights, come about through compromise, pragmatism, and collaboration from everyone involved. That's not what we've been getting from our legislature the past 4 or so years.
Thank you, Ms. Reese. We now move on to Ms. Seegers for her 2-minute opening statement.
I'd like to thank the Purdue College Republicans and the Purdue College Democrats for hosting tonight, and all of you for coming out, and those of you watching on live stream, welcome. I was born and raised, as you heard, here in Tippecanoe County, and I've spent the best years of my life here. I was away for a short time, but I returned to take care of my parents as they were aging and needing help. And I found that when I came back, my Hoosier roots sank even deeper, and I can't think of a better place to carry on my family's tradition of public service than right here in District 26. This is an exciting time here. We're now moving forward with multiple projects to improve our community. We have several new industries and many new local businesses. This period of growth is possible because of the excellent cooperative spirit between our 2 city governments, our county government, and Purdue University. I'm happy and proud to be able to say that I'm participating in this as a member of the county council, and I know that this model of putting political affiliation aside and working together for the common good is what always achieves the best results. With your help, I'm going to take this model of cooperation as well as my wealth of experience in business to the State House. And there I'll be working from within the majority party and on both sides of the aisle to ensure the best outcomes for District 26. My first priority is to continue to attract new industry to our state and especially to our district by maintaining Indiana's responsible fiscal policies, developing our workforce, and finding responsible funding solutions to improve our infrastructure. Next, I will focus on public education. Together, we will improve public education. I will continue to do as I have been this year, listening to superintendents, teachers, principals, and legislators, and trying to develop healthier relationships between those groups. Because if we don't, our children are the ones who will suffer.
We now move on to our first question, which will be directed to Sally. The closure of an I-65 bridge last year undoubtedly slowed the Indiana and Lafayette economy, not to mention the commute of anyone traveling between Indianapolis and Lafayette or Chicago. The Department of Transportation reports that 6.4% of state bridges are in poor condition, which poses both economic and safety risks to Hoosiers. How do you plan to address this issue in the state?
Well, let me say first that this year the legislature approved $186 million of surplus revenue, which was distributed to the communities and counties for improving our infrastructure. And they also approved and issued over $100 million in matching grants so that the communities and the counties could improve their infrastructure. I will continue to pursue those kinds of financing solutions that are sustainable and do not raise tax dollars so that we can continue to improve our infrastructure. And I think if you've driven around District 26 this summer, you know that we're putting a high priority on improving our roads and bridges.
Thank you. Ms. Zucchi, we are asking the same question. How do you plan to address the issue of poor condition roads and bridges?
What I think needs to happen is that we not only need to complete the new projects that have been undertaken, largely with federal dollars that had exploding deadlines, which is why we've got about 10 projects going on at the same time. But we actually need to put into place a long-term, thoughtful plan for maintenance of roads and bridges. And that is something that the legislature, sadly, failed to do this year. What we need is for a serious look at finances. We have gas tax funds that have not been allocated. They're sitting in the surplus of the state treasury. And it's time to start looking hard at bridges that are collapsing and falling apart. We need to look at bridges, at roads, also county roads that need paving, that need grading, that need improving and expansion. I don't get the sense that the legislature is really interested in committing the money that it's going to take. $180 million will build maybe a couple of miles of interstate. And if there's any example of how badly managed road construction is, try driving from Indianapolis to Bloomington. Because right now it's a mess and the vendors are suing the state.
Thank you, Ms. Weedstein.
Ms. Seegers, we give you 30 seconds to respond.
I'm interested to hear my opponent say that she wants to tap into our surplus. That surplus is the reason that Indiana is number 5 in the nation and number 1 in the state as ideal places for industry to locate. That surplus means that many of the services and the issues that my opponent values would not have funding in an economic downturn. It is not a big slush fund, that surplus. It is earmarked so that during a time of economic downturn, we can continue to provide the services that we need to provide.
Thank you. Vicki, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Okay. It's really interesting to hear my opponent talk about economic downturns because, in fact, Indiana has not recovered to where it was in 2007 prior to the meltdown of financial markets, the housing market, and a lot of companies in 2008. Median household income in Indiana is still only about $47,000, and national median income is at $56,000. We have not recovered. We are still in the downturn.
Thank you, Ms. Weedstein. All right, we will move on to our second question tonight. And we will start with Ms. Weedstein. Though Purdue stands apart from other schools around the country, a number of students statewide are accumulating student debt, inhibiting their full entry into adult life. What actions will you take at the State House to keep public higher education affordable for all Hoosiers?
Well, the student debt problem is one that hits me hard. Next year, my husband and I will be sending our third child off to college. We'll have 3 in college in the same year. Trying to keep their debt loads to a reasonable amount just for a BA is a serious, serious consideration. At Purdue, tuition has been held constant, but other fees have gone up. So part of the problem is that the states, and this is not just Indiana, it's true all over the country, the states have decided not to invest in higher education at the same levels that they did 25 or 30 years ago. The other thing that's happening in higher education today is that the hiring at the level of administration has absolutely ballooned so that people making like 3 times what faculty members make are becoming a much bigger part of the total cost of the university. So one of the things that needs to happen is that universities need to take a really hard look at what they're spending money on. And if education is the primary purpose of the university, then they need to actually rethink this ballooning of administrative costs. And as a legislature, that's what I would help take a look at.
Thank you, Vicki. We'll move on to Sally. What action will you take at the State House to keep public higher education affordable for all Hoosiers?
Well, I think that at first I would encourage every university in Indiana to follow our President Mitch Daniels' example and freeze tuition. I know that it's, as in most businesses, we can't roll it back, but we can freeze it. And also, I think that one thing we need to remember about Purdue University, and I will be its biggest cheerleader at the legislature and try and procure as many dollars for Purdue as I can, is Purdue is an integral part of the economy, not only of this town and this state, but of our country and of the world. And innovations like the genome mapping soybean and corn Innovation Center that just opened, that is the only one of its kind in the country, is going to help scientists do the research they need to do to feed the world. So investing in Purdue, you bet. I'll fight for that. I'll be Purdue's biggest cheerleader, because Purdue will help feed the world, Purdue will help engineer the solutions for the world, and at the same time keep the cost for its students at a steady level.
Thank you. Vicki, you have 30 seconds to respond.
I'm a lifelong member of the academic community. There is no greater proponent of education and higher education in this race than myself. So, two things. When you freeze tuition, there's still inflation. Costs still go up. The money has to be found. So freezing tuition is not the solution. It's not the entire solution. And then I would wonder where my opponent will get those dollars that she says she will obtain from the legislature. Where do you get them? Out of what part of the budget will they come?
Thank you, Ms. Lucy.
My opponent may not have the advantage I do of being part of government and may not realize that 12% of the state of Indiana's budget is spent on higher education. So I will get those dollars from that percentage and urge more of them to come to Purdue, where we know there will be a return on investment. There's a difference between being an academic all your life and being in business all your life. And that difference is that you can see, because in business you have to find funding, you have to have positive cash flow, you can find those solutions. It's just a matter of being creative and utilizing your experience.
Thank you, Sally.
Sticking with the topic of Purdue, Purdue University, under the direction of President Daniels, has adopted the Chicago principles, standing in strong support of free expression, drawing both praise and ire from students and faculty. Where do you stand on this issue, and would you support any limits to free expression on campus? This question goes to Sally first.
Well, I think that the college experience is meant to prepare students for real life. And in real life, there are no safe zones. In real life, there are no places where you can limit free speech. And in this country, that's one of our founding principles and one of the articles in the Constitution. So I think that we are doing exactly the right thing. Our students need to be exposed to real life situations, and that includes disagreements and hearing things that aren't pleasant. But where I would draw the limit, as in any other case, is one person's right ends when another person's right is impinged upon.
Thank you, Sally. Vicki, the same question. Where do you stand on the issue of free speech, and would you support any limits to free expression on campus?
Of course there are reasonable limits to expression. There are in every context. What safe zones and trigger warnings accomplish in a university community, in a classroom, is that they promote inclusion. They bring people into the conversation who would otherwise, by virtue of a traumatic past experience or by virtue of feeling singled out as a member of a minority community, feel that they would be unable to participate. That's the glory of the university, is that it's not creating some sort of sanitized environment where nobody says anything disagreeable. That's not it at all. And to say that, I think, really promotes a misunderstanding of the purpose of safety zones and trigger warnings. The First Amendment to the Constitution protects us from unreasonable government restrictions on speech. Most universities have solved this problem by borrowing from the language of hostile work environments. So if your speech in a classroom tends to create a hostile environment for another student, and the standards for this are very clearly laid out in case law and in student handbooks. This is not a matter of a vague standard between one set of rights and another set of rights. It's about whether you make another person's learning experience impossible. This is not something that has to be reinvented. This has been done in universities all across the land, and we can do it here.
Thank you. Sally, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Once again, I will repeat that I think the role of a university is to prepare students for the real world. And I've been in a lot of very competitive businesses, and I've heard a lot of things that weren't very pleasant. But I've persisted, and I've acknowledged that person's right to say what they said as long as it didn't impinge on my rights. So I would stick to saying that this is not the place to limit free speech.
We're not limiting free speech. And I, again, will push back against the notion that being a member of a university community somehow means you're not partaking in the real world. Universities are microcosms of society, and they aspire to a higher ideal of civility and of discourse. And I must, again, remark that it's not just a matter of one set of rights against another. How do I know when I've infringed upon her rights? I know if it's brought to my attention that something that I said threatened her or made it impossible for her to express a contrary point of view. I've actually taught this stuff. I've written a book about this stuff. I understand that it may seem vague and difficult to parse, but it really is not. It's being done on every campus in this country.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes.
We'll move on to the next question here. Do you support increasing funding for charter schools? We'll start with this one.
No, I don't. I think with charter schools, there has to be a proven, demonstrated, value added, or there is no reason for them to exist. Charter schools in this state are being given a blank check. They get state dollars. They don't have to hire certified teachers. They don't have to take special needs students. They don't have to take English language learners. They don't have to take kids of a socioeconomic status that they think are unacceptable. They can pick and choose, just like ordinary private schools. We should not be subsidizing a parallel system of education that only exacerbates existing systems of racial and economic segregation. And I want to know what those charter schools are doing with the money that they're getting when they get grades of F from the state year after year after year. It's an outrage, and we should all be outraged.
Sally, do you support increasing funding for charter schools?
I think here my opponent and I agree. Charter schools need to be held to the same standard as public schools. They have not traditionally performed well, and they have received failing grades, but so have our public schools. But I agree, they need to be held to the same standard as our public schools if they're going to receive the same tax dollars. One charter school, though, that gives me great hope is the Purdue Polytechnic Institute. It is backed by the full support of Purdue University, and it is lifting teenagers in inner city Indianapolis who otherwise wouldn't have a very good chance at a career out of that cycle. It's giving them an education that is going to be at the level that they will be either equipped with a certification to make a good living as they finish high school or to get admitted to Purdue University. We will need to watch that and react quickly if it doesn't work like we expect it to, but I think it's an exciting pilot program, and I hope it succeeds so we can look forward to more of these, because this is how we break the cycle of poverty. We equip people to join the workforce and be successful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just really, really skeptical because there are other universities that have charter schools that are not doing well. Our own backyard school, New Community, its charter is held by Ball State, and it's struggling. And it actually adds value to the local community because we don't have as many alternatives as they do in Indianapolis or other metropolitan areas. We don't have schools that can take special needs kids, and New Community does, and it deserves more support than it's getting. But I'm very skeptical about this whole initiative.
Thank you.
30 seconds.
Well, I guess I'm a relentless optimist, especially about the ability of Purdue University. But I think that we do need to respond more quickly to failing schools. For example, the virtual schools, they're failing. We need to have responded to them previously, and we need to respond swiftly if this Purdue Polytechnic Institute doesn't work. But my money's on Purdue.
Okay, candidates, these next two questions will relate to the fact that Indiana has become an unfortunate face of this nation's growing drug addiction epidemic. First, how will you address the state's drug epidemic at the State House? We'll start with Sally.
As a CASA, I worked alongside Chief Justice Loretta Rush when she was still here, and I saw the devastation that drug addiction causes to children. I saw a little boy chewing the wooden frame of his bunk bed because of the trauma he had witnessed from his addicted parents. I know that mothers are burying their children, and spouses are burying their spouses because of overdose deaths. Here in Tippecanoe County, we have an average of 1 overdose a day of heroin or spice. I have a plan that I have worked on with law enforcement as a legislator that I intend to bring into law. First, the law to swiftly States. This is a failure of the federal government, and we need to address it. Second, we need to increase the penalties for drug dealers who sell controlled substances that result in a death. We need to raise the level of that felony to at least level 3 or level 4 so that there are much more stringent penalties for selling an overdose that is lethal. And third, for addicts, we need to stop the cycle of addiction by sentencing them to a therapeutic community, which already exists in the DOC. There are 1,700 beds in our state set aside for 9 to 12 months of therapeutic treatment. It is not punitive, it is therapeutic, and once a convicted addict completes that program, he will bypass the sentencing court and be directly put under the auspices of community corrections so that he can rejoin the world. If you talk to any drug counselor, they'll tell you that a 3-month program that allows the addict to live in the same environment where he has been using is failing.
Thank you, Sally. How will you address this state's drug epidemic at the State House?
Okay, I hope you'll allow me as much time as she just had. Great. The drug addiction is real. It's an epidemic. It's growing. And the legislature has known for years that Tippecanoe County was like the biggest meth lab producing county in the state. And what's been done? What's the county council done? What we need to do is absolutely and thoroughly commit ourselves to programs of interdiction, addiction counseling, treatment, recovery, and maintenance of sobriety. That has to start with overhauling and ameliorating the shortage that we have of mental health care providers in this state and in our county in particular. Right now, there are no mental health care providers in our county that are accepting new patients. That's critical. That's absolutely insane. We need to have a legislature engage in the same kind of promotion of the study of the field that it's now doing for education. We need to provide scholarships for nurse practitioners to get certified so that they can treat patients and monitor meds and do the kind of clinical practice that we don't have enough psychiatrists to do. Anyone who's worked in the field of drug addiction will tell you that it starts with mental health. We have to begin treatment by dealing with the mental health shortage that we have in our community, and treat drug addiction less as a crime and more as an illness.
First of all, I would like to say that the county council has no lawmaking ability. We do budgets for the county. That's the extent of our duties. Secondly, I'd like to say that the meth labs here in Tippecanoe County are not what's killing our citizens. Heroin and spice are much more readily available and much more popular for addicts to use today than meth. Meth is a bigger problem in the southern part of the state now. Also, I'd like to inform my opponent that being on the Tippecanoe County Mental Health Task Force, we are actually starting to lift the curriculum for nurse practitioners from IUPUI and trying to bring it here to Purdue. So her idea is a great one. We're doing it.
Vicki, you have 30 seconds.
Okay. When you do budgets, you're making policy. The power to tax, as John Marshall famously said in McCulloch versus Bank of Maryland, the power to tax is the power to destroy. It's also the power to create. So, maybe this county council has chosen not to create, but I think that local governments must be involved in this enterprise with the state to address the drug epidemic. And just because meth doesn't kill doesn't mean it doesn't traumatize and scar people for life.
Thank you. Speaking of the drug addiction problem here in our community, do you support expanding needle exchange programs in the state? We'll start with that.
No, I think you start with me.
Sorry, we'll start.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the HIV outbreak in Indiana last year was the direct result of Mike Pence closing down Planned Parenthood clinics and shutting down their needle exchange programs. As a result, we had an HIV epidemic in the southern part of our state that was completely avoidable and preventable. And now we have to worry about the costs of health care for people who developed HIV from using dirty needles. This is just terrible, terrible leadership.
I think needle exchanges are the tip of the iceberg. Of course, I would support them. I think that it is equally or more important that, as I said, we stop the importation of heroin in this country, that we get effective treatment for people who are addicted, treatment that lasts long enough and is effective enough that they can get out of the cycle of addiction. And also, I think it is vital that we make sure our children do not get co-opted into that cycle of addiction. As a CASA, the sad news is that we see the children of children that were removed from homes. So we may have a case where a child is removed from the home because of the parent's drug addiction, but that parent was removed from the home because of their parent's drug addiction. This is the cycle we have to break. But of course, it's only common sense to support needle exchange as one small portion of what we need to do to stop this scourge of addiction.
Thank you. Vicki, a response?
Yeah, okay, so stopping importation of heroin, it's not like the federal government isn't doing anything about that problem. It's a really deeply sown issue, and it's got structural elements to it that are very difficult for the federal government to stop. One of them is that people make synthetic forms of heroin, or they take real heroin and they lace it with fentanyl or another drug, and they sell that. So it's very easy to say, oh yeah, the federal government should just full stop, put an end to heroin trafficking. We should, well, I'll just say the word Afghanistan, and there is a big piece of the heroin trade that we are facing now. We left Afghanistan for the most part, and they went back to farming poppy.
Thank you.
So there you go.
Again, there's that eternal optimist who says that just because we haven't been successful doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue our efforts and increase them to stop the importation of heroin, to help addicts break the cycle of addiction, to rescue our children from the cycle of addiction, and to be more effective in limiting the use of prescribed opiates leading to addiction. And we should also realize that even Narcan can become a dangerous drug, as addicts are treated during an overdose, and the Narcan has a shorter half-life, meaning it wears off sooner than the heroin that caused the overdose. So the addict leaves the hospital because HIPAA laws turn him loose. And he goes out and he gets another dose of heroin and he overdoses.
Our next question, taking a little bit different turn, will first be directed to Sally. Are you satisfied with the current iteration of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA, with the amendment that passed clarifying that the law cannot be used to discriminate against gay and transgender preachers?
You know, discrimination is wrong. It's morally wrong. It's illegal. It can't be tolerated. RFRA, let's face it, we'll all agree, was a misstep. But we have the law of the land now, which says that gay people can marry just like straight people, and we are sworn to uphold that law of the land. As a public official, I will defend every single citizen's rights under the law. The only place I draw the line is the government, just as they cannot impede equal rights for its citizens, cannot force churches to change their sacraments. What goes on in a church is protected by the Constitution, and the only danger that comes is if people leave that church and carry that dogma and use it as an excuse for discrimination, and that is wrong. I am a champion of equal rights for every citizen.
Same question. Are you satisfied with the current iteration of RFRA with the amendment that passed, clarifying that discrimination against gay and transgender users is unlawful?
No. And the reason is this. The worst part of that law, the really pernicious, evil part of that law, is not something anybody's talking about. It's the part that gives corporations the right to express religious convictions and to use those religious convictions as an affirmative defense to any suit alleging discrimination. And not just that, but when churches or any person, corporation, or other organization is sued, and they raise that affirmative defense, they are immediately entitled to declarative relief. That means they get damages from the person that sued them who was discriminated against in the first place. That has got to go. There's just no way that we want to embrace the idea that corporations have religious beliefs. I have been going to church my whole life. I've never sat in a pew next to a corporation. Never. So that's why it's still not just a misstep, it was a purposeful introduction of the legalization of discrimination into our laws. And it's the reason I'm in this race. I'm really happy to hear now that Sally says she will now uphold the law because in April she said that she would have abstained on voting on the vote on the bill. That's just, I'm really glad she's reconsidered that position. It is not a part of RFRA that any church is obliged to change its sacraments. That is simply not the case, and it will never be the case for the reason that she gave, because churches are separate entities.
Okay, we're going to move on to allow Sally to respond.
I want to congratulate the Tippecanoe County Commissioners for their latest move for equality with gender and transgender bathroom rights. They moved swiftly and decisively to approve the use of whatever bathroom a person's gender identity is. They did it in 2 hearings because that's required by law. And I think that shows just how open-minded and how fair-minded our district is. And I am proud to be a part of that.
Yes, I too congratulate the County Commission for following the example set by the City of West Lafayette and the City of Lafayette, which had in fact already approved the addition of gender identity to the human rights ordinances that they have in their jurisdictions. So yeah, I think it's great that District 26 can be a leader statewide in bringing these laws to pass, but much more work needs to be done, and it will take a forceful representative to make it happen.
Thank you.
facts a little bit, and we will start with Vicki here. What can Indiana do better to encourage state university graduates to remain in the state after graduation?
They can pass a statewide hate crime law. They can pass statewide non-discrimination laws. They can make this place legally hospitable to individuals who don't look like, I don't know, the typical Hoosier. People like you, people like me. I think there's so much to unpack in that question. The brain drain is a concern that I've been articulating ever since the beginning of the primary. We need to do so many things, and some of them have to be the responsibility of the private sector. Jobs have to be there for people who have gotten this high-level training in STEM disciplines here at Purdue. They have to be ready and waiting. We simply have not, again, it's part of the larger economic stagnation we're having in Indiana. Corporations that come here need to be ready to train and hire people for these kinds of new tech 21st century jobs. I also think people need to feel like Indiana is a welcoming place, that our Hoosier hospitality isn't just a slogan, that it really is a spirit, an ethic that we practice every day, that we believe in. And I think we can do a heck of a lot more than we have already. We can make Muslims feel welcome. We can make black people feel welcome. We can do everything in our power to be present to everybody in the community when they feel attacked or impugned. And that's just something we have to be aware of.
Thank you, Vicki. Sally?
The question, please.
Oh, sure. What can Indiana do better to encourage state university graduates to remain in the state after graduation?
As a member of a good example of what we can do, private sector and public, as a member of that task force for mental health, we are, and the nurse practitioner program that we're going to import, we are going to encourage, and I think we can transfer this to graduates of Purdue and of other universities, we are going to encourage the graduates to stay here in the community by trading them years of service for tuition reimbursement. They'll make their regular salary. They may need to make interest payments as they work, but at different increments of years of service, we will forgive tuition debt. And I think programs like this that join the public and the private sector together will help make our community more attractive. Also, we're doing a heck of a lot of work to make Lafayette and West Lafayette communities of choice. You may have noticed the Riverwalk has started, State Street Project has started, and their Tippecanoe Arts Federation is thriving. We are doing everything we can to make this a community of choice. The Hoosier State Railroad is a good example. Millennials, you guys don't like to have a car? Great, you can hop that train and go to Indy. You can hop that train and go to Chicago. We're keeping that. We're helping to fund that to help make this a community of choice. I think between helping with tuition reimbursement, improving our community's aesthetics, and what we have to offer, we can retain students.
Thank you, Sally. Vicki?
You know what? I don't really have anything to add.
Well, I'd like to say that after 20 years of planning, the Wabash River Enhancement Corporation has been able to start work, and we signed the contract last week for the river promenade that is going to run the initial phase of it between 2nd Street and the John Muir pedestrian bridge. It's going to be joined to the new Mark building. It's going to be accessible from the John Muir bridge, and it is going to be a huge asset to our community.
Thank you, Sally.
We now move to a question for Sally first about, there was a bill 2 years ago that attempted to restrict the rights of out-of-state students attending Indiana universities to vote in Indiana elections. Do you support the right of out-of-state students to establish residency and vote in Indiana elections?
I support the right of everyone who meets the age and residency requirements to vote in Indiana elections. I support their right to be registered as voters and to vote in our elections. To say otherwise would be foolish, because that's a guaranteed right under the Constitution, And we've taken great pains to make sure, and there, we have done all, the League of Women Voters fights constantly to make sure that voters can be registered who are eligible and that votes are fair. And our county clerk, Krista Coffey, spends nights and weekends making sure that our elections are fair. So yes, anyone meeting the residency requirement and age requirement should be allowed to be registered and then to vote.
Thank you. The same question to Vicki. Do you support the right of out-of-state students to vote in Indiana elections?
Absolutely, as long as they comply with the legal requirements. That just seems like such a no-brainer. But I have a bigger issue with the practice of voting as it unfolds in our state and even in our country. I'm really disturbed by the emerging assumption that the default assumption is that people are not allowed to vote until they somehow prove that they're eligible to vote. And that the assumption in the county clerk's office is that there are checks that they do. They go through the voter rolls and they knock people off the voter rolls if they suspect but don't prove that somebody isn't qualified to vote. That happened to my then 17-year-old son in the primary. The reason he was knocked off of his voter registration was because he's got a twin sister who lives at the same address and has the same birthday. And because she registered after him, her registration nullified his. I've heard since the primary election that happens to sets of twins on a regular basis. So my question is, what is that about? And who else is it happening to? And we need to fix this.
I'm happy to inform my opponent that that has been fixed. We have appropriated the money to buy new software for our election process because of problems like Vicki cited. And so that problem hopefully has been fixed. But no system is perfect. We will always have glitches. It's the nature of software. I don't need to tell any of you that. And we will keep doing what we have always done, which is striving to make those systems better and better.
Yeah, except the problem was these mistakes weren't caused by software. They were human decisions.
I'm sorry, the question time is over now.
Oh, wasn't I given a rebuttal?
Yes,
This is my rebuttal.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, this was human decision making and a policy put into place. There are rules that govern how voter registrations are analyzed by the county clerk staff. And while I definitely agree that it's wonderful that the county council has put some money into upgrading our voting technology, I would say I'm waiting to be convinced that the solution has in fact been complete, that it's accurate, and that everybody who's got the right to vote, who's registered to vote, gets to vote.
I apologize.
That's okay. No problem.
For our last question tonight, we invite each candidate to talk about one issue that is important to them and that has not yet been discussed. So you will have 2 minutes each to talk about an issue and then 1 minute each to discuss. You may start.
Oh, let me think for a sec.
Sure.
Because let me think, an issue. You guys did a great job of covering the spectrum. Let's talk about poverty. Let's talk about hungry people in our district. Let's talk about people who go to bed hungry, kids who go to school in order to eat, who are hungry during the summers. And we have great non-governmental entities like LUM that sponsors the Hunger Hike with St. Thomas and Food Finders, Food Bank, and they do God's work. But the problem is always going to be so much bigger than they are. And until we find ways to bring our economy back to where it should be, we have to deal with the fact that 1 in every 4 children in Indiana lives in poverty. That's an absolute disgrace. And we should all feel a sense of ownership in solving that problem. And that's something I think the legislature principally should be attending to, should care about. I'm less interested in the pay of CEOs than I am in making sure that every child attending school in this state has a good breakfast, a good lunch, and a chance at a decent dinner.
Thank you so much. Sally, you have 2 minutes to talk about an issue that is important to you and has not been discussed yet.
One of the issues I am most passionate about was mentioned peripherally, but was not one of your questions, so I'm going to talk about mental health care. Belonging to the task force, the Tippecanoe County Task Force for Mental Health, we have identified a 3-pronged plan to attack the lack of providers, the lack of funding, and the lack of a viable continuum of care for people in need of mental health services. As I mentioned, we're going to lift the IUPUI curriculum for nurse practitioners, bring it to, hopefully, to Purdue. We won't have to reinvent the wheel or spend time developing a curriculum. A state-approved curriculum exists, and we'll be able to use it. And we will use tuition reimbursement to try and persuade those graduates to stay here in the community, because there's a shortage nationwide. The second area, the revenue piece, we're looking at creative ways using local charitable foundations, local banks, partly the government, to fund the co-pays and cost of prescription drugs for health care that people can't afford. We are looking at ways to fund also better services, because providers tell us that they make money on case managers, but they can't even break even on therapists. That is counterproductive to better mental health care. So we're looking at ways to remedy that. And third, we're looking at ways to have more of those profitable case managers. This should be an easy sell, so that people who are in crisis and receive treatment at a facility like River Bend and then are kicked out with a set of instructions they may not be capable of understanding or following through on, have someone to shepherd them through the system so they don't fall through the cracks, so they receive the continuing treatment they need. This is the compassionate way our community responds, and this is the model I want to take with me to the legislature.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you. 1 minute.
To do what?
To respond or say or expand upon the issues.
I didn't get to respond to the
Oh, you will also.
Okay.
After, just like how we were doing on the other question.
Okay. I think neither of us knew how this one was going to go. That's fine. I, too, have been giving quite a bit of attention to the issue of mental health. And I have personal experience with this in terms of the difficulty of finding providers or having continuity of care. One of my children's on the autism spectrum. He's been on medication since he was 6. He's now 16. And my older son had a really aid governmental policy that we can address this shortage. It's really critical that we do so.
Thank you, Vicki. Sally, 1 minute.
I want to respond to one thing that my opponent said in her statement, and that is that Indiana is still struggling economically. While we have areas where we need to improve, our unemployment rate just dropped to 4.5%. And with the new industry coming in, like GE Aviation, we are bringing in incredibly satisfying, high-paying, skilled jobs. And we have Ivy Tech, who's able to train people in 8 weeks for a certification to take those high-paying jobs. We have programs in place, and I would suggest that high schools offer some kind of manufacturing skill program for students who are not going to go on to college. Maybe even all the high schools could join together and have one department that graduates students who are not going to college with manufacturing skills so they can get good paying jobs when they graduate. So those are some of the ways I think we can attack that poverty problem.
Thank you. That was the end of our questioning session. We now invite both candidates to make 2-minute closing statements. And depending on the pre-debate coin flip, we will start with Sally and end with Vicki. So Sally, you have 2 minutes to make a closing statement.
I'd like to go back and remind you of my priorities that I've listed tonight, the things that I will take with me to the State House. First, I will take the ability and the desire to continue to expand our new industry base, and I will fight to preserve that surplus that gives us our AAA bond rating, that gives us the ability when industry looks at us to be #1 in the Midwest and #5 in the country, because we can pay our debts. We can not go back to a system where before the Daniels administration, our reserves were so drained that teachers were getting paid late, municipalities were getting their state money late. We can't do that to teachers again. I'll fight to preserve that surplus so that we look attractive to those industries, because they know the services they need that will bring them here will be provided for them even if we do have an economic downturn. Second, I will work with educators, as I have been doing all summer, and I will be a voice in with and across the aisle. And third, I will attack our drug problem and improve our mental health care system. These are the things I will do with your help, drawing on your knowledge, because I can't be an expert in everything, but luckily I have all of you behind me to call on when I need you, and I invite you all to be sure you visit me and help me at the State House.
Thank you, Sally.
Class families, minimum work, people who really are getting lost in the Daniels-Pence approach to governance. It's not just about bringing in big companies. It's about making sure that everybody benefits from the policies you enact. I'm glad Sally's been working with educators, although I got to tell you all, I have the endorsements of the teachers' unions. They expect me to follow through on what needs to happen with education in this state, and that is to abandon the ALEC-driven agenda that has been pushed on us by the Daniels-Pence administration. So there's no mistaking, there is no debate over which of these two candidates up here is going to push for the kind of education system that we all want. Here's the thing. It makes no sense whatever to send another Republican to the legislature from our district. Here's why. The reason both of us are standing here tonight is because Randy Truitt is not running for re-election. He's not running for re-election because he's too conservative for our district and not nearly conservative enough for the supermajority House Republican caucus. We need to flip this seat so that we can balance the numbers more closely in the legislature and have a seat at the table. The Republicans have not been listening to Randy. They aren't going to listen to her if she breaks from their platform. If we want things to change, we need different representation in the legislature, the kind of representation that I am qualified and inspired to bring.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our debate. Let's give our candidates...
Thank you, Sally.